So I think we can all agree flagship phones are great. They're exciting, they're platforms for innovation, and maybe more than that, they give smartphone makers the opportunity to think about what we should be able to do in the future and start working towards that today. That is hugely important. I will never take that away. But what I think is more exciting is the idea of taking some of those features, and especially that top-tier performance, and making it more accessible to more people. That's what a lot of companies have done. That's what Apple has done with the iPhone XR and 11, and that work continues with the new iPhone SE, which Apple just announced today. It's going to cost $399 for the 64 gig model, the base, and that's pretty wild, especially for a company that hasn't tried making a phone like this in a good couple years. To rewind a bit, the original iPhone SE came out in 2016, and it basically took what made the iPhone 6s special and squeezed it into the body of an iPhone 5s, which to me was a great move because the 5s is the best looking iPhone of all time. I'm willing to die on that hill, do not at me. What Apple's doing with the new 2020 model is very similar. They're trying to take a lot of what went into the iPhone 11 and squeeze it into the body of the iPhone 8, which I think it makes sense. They've been selling the iPhone 8 up until today, so they clearly still have the production capability to make those devices. But I also think that the version of the iPhone SE we're getting now looks more dated now than the original iPhone SE looked in 2016. We've got big bezels around this 4.7-inch Retina display, and that's not a huge deal necessarily, but phones largely don't look like this anymore. We've moved to the age of edge-to-edge screens, and I think a lot of people, even people shopping on a budget, aren't going to want to turn back. Ultimately though, what's more important is the stuff happening inside the 2020 iPhone SE. You're getting the Apple A13 Bionic chipset, the best chipset Apple's ever made, and the one that's currently being used in its flagship phone that'll cost you well over $1,000. To get that for $400 is pretty wild. There are caveats in the design, sure, but I don't think anyone's going to complain about the level of performance that you'd be able to get out of this $400 phone. Speaking of power, Apple says you're also getting the same great battery life as the iPhone 8, which I don't remember being particularly awesome, but for $400 I might be willing to overlook that. You have wireless charging, fast charging if you're using a charger that's more than 18 watts. We have Wi-Fi 6, which is great if you're sitting at home and have already invested in a Wi-Fi 6 router. And if you're still traveling or plan to at some point once this is all over, you get dual SIM with an eSIM, which is definitely not something you could have done with the original iPhone 8. It's worth talking about the cameras too. Now, Apple showed us some photos taken with the iPhone SE this morning in a special presentation, and they looked good, as you would expect from what seems like a decently high-end Apple camera. It's a 12 megapixel sensor with an f1.8 aperture. It's got focus pixels. It's got support for 4K 60 video. It's a pretty reliable sensor, at least on paper. Again, we haven't tried this thing. Point is, the photos Apple showed us did look good, or at least as good as they could on my desktop and not some massive screen at an event space in California somewhere. There are a couple caveats to point out, the biggest of which I think is the lack of a dedicated night mode. The A13 helped make that possible for the iPhone 11 series, but that is just going to remain an iPhone 11 exclusive, which, fine, I guess. If there was a technical reason that Apple couldn't implement it, they weren't going to tell us about it. Now, there is just the one camera, plus the 7 megapixel camera up front, if you count that, which will take portraits, by the way, if you're into that sort of thing. They're probably not going to be fantastic, but we'll have to wait and see. But I think all of that dovetails nicely into a question that's been on my mind since Apple announced this thing this morning. Does this thing have the capability to compete with the best of the mid-range market right now? Is this going to be Apple's next blockbuster iPhone? I honestly cannot tell. I think part of it is the dated design. Phones, as I've said, don't look like this anymore, so I have to wonder how many people have moved away from that look entirely. But also more broadly, the competition has gotten so good. There is, for example, the Samsung Galaxy A51. It's got an enormous screen. It's got 2 cameras, including a very good ultra-wide camera. And as the name suggests, 5G. Now that might not mean a lot to everyone right now, but for $500, it's proof that you can get really excellent components into a body that doesn't cost a ton of money. We're also waiting for Google to officially announce the Pixel 4a, which they should just really do already. Like, we've got all of the stuff, it's done, just say it already. Point is, the Pixel 4a will almost certainly have a better screen than the iPhone SE, and I have to imagine the iPhone SE wins in performance too, but clean Google software plus what should be a really solid camera, that could give Apple something to worry about here. Now, I could spend all day talking about which phones stack up well compared to the iPhone SE and which ones don't, but that's almost not the point. Now that Apple has chosen once again to play in this space, you better believe that everyone who's currently playing in it right now is gonna have to try a little harder to make its mark. Whether you're an iPhone person or an Android fan, or even if you haven't made up your mind yet, phones that cost about $300 to $500 will almost certainly get better as a result of all of this extra competition. That's good for you and me and anyone else out there looking to buy a smartphone right now. That's important stuff. And that's basically where the iPhone SE stands right now. I'm personally really looking forward to testing this phone. If you have things that you want us to look for while we're testing, be sure to leave a comment. Thank you, as always, for watching. It means a lot to us. We're going through some weird times, all of us are, and I hope that you're continuing to stay safe, to stay healthy, and that you're looking out for each other. Thanks again. Stay tuned for next time.